Aloha and happy Aloha Friday. Welcome to this special edition of Business Matters Radio Show. I'm Pamela Timpop, president of the Maui Chamber of Commerce and your host, and we are pleased to do a special broadcast today to share more information on vaccines and the importance of getting vaccinated to help our community. We have some amazing guests from Kaiser Permanente today and from the business community. And we are excited to first welcome Tarquin Collis and Dr. Zumir Moen. Dr. Collis is the Chief of Infectious Disease and Assistant Area Medical Director of Medical Specialties at Kaiser Permanente, Hawaii. He oversees care and delivery for allergy, cardiology, dermatology, endocrinology, gastroenterology, hematology, and oncology. Boy, that's a lot of ologies, in addition to infectious disease. But there's more. There's nephrology, neurosciences, pulmonary and sleep medicine, rheumatology, and transgender services. He is board certified in infectious disease and internal medicine, and he is also one of the people who treated the very first cases of COVID-19 in Hawaii. So he has a distinguished reputation there. Dr. Moen is the Chief of Staff at Kaiser Permanente Moanalua Medical Center and co-incident commander of the Kaiser Permanente Hawaii COVID-19 Emergency Operations Center. He oversees care and delivery for continuing care of palliative care, critical care medicine, emergency medicine, geriatric medicine, hospital medicine, and hospital-based outpatient services, along with emergency medicine and MD call center. He is board certified in internal medicine. So first, welcome to both of you, doctors. But we'll start with Tarquin. Aloha, and how are you today?
Hey, I'm well. Thanks a lot, Pam. Thanks for having us both on. Really appreciate it.
Thank you so much for joining us. So Tarquin,
Sure.
And I did get his permission so that I could call him Tarquin instead of Dr. Tarquin. But Tarquin, please share some of the information on how far we've come with COVID, your recollections from when we first started with patients, and how the vaccine protects and saves lives.
Sure. Yeah. Well, it's been a pretty wild year and a quarter, I guess, by this point. A lot of us in infectious disease, which is, despite all those ologies, that's my day job, is taking care of people with infections of different kinds. And back in the day, we were ready for Ebola, which thank goodness didn't arrive on our shores. And there was a similar feeling of sort of dread and expectation in the early part of last year as we watched COVID pop up in one state after another, and we were, among the last to have our first cases. But I have a lot of colleagues on the mainland in infectious diseases, and we were very aware of what was happening in all of these different places. And yeah, I remember very clearly we had one patient who had been on a cruise ship, and she popped up as the first case on an outpatient basis on a Thursday, and then I was on call on 2 days later on a Saturday when the first incredibly sick patient showed up in our emergency room, and I went and saw him, and I really felt like, okay, here we go. I called Sarah Kemble, who head of the epidemiology side on the Department of Health phone lines, and said, hey, Sarah, I think these are our first two patients, and this is the start of it all. And I remember both of us just sort of like pausing in that moment and realizing things were going to change very quickly and never quite be the same. And it's been a wild time since then. And what was interesting about those two patients is they really ended up representing two different sides of the spectrum of disease that we've been dealing with since then, and rapidly coming to understand. Our outpatient from the cruise ship did great. Never got particularly ill. We cared for her. We're still in intermittent contact, and she's lovely and has done great. Whereas our other patient was in the 15 or 16 months of taking care of these people, one of the 2 or 3 sickest patients I've ever seen with COVID. Just came in so incredibly ill, and we ended up having to put him on a breathing machine, and he died some weeks later despite us pulling out all the stops. And I think about his case a lot because it was such an unfortunate introduction to the disease, and I often feel like if I had met him, some months later or half a year later when we understood more about how best to care for these folks, we might have been able to save him. And he was really a lovely guy with a lovely family, and so I still feel that loss, a long time later. And I think in the years since then, we've come to, I spend my life, really my adult life, thinking about infections and trying to do what I can for them. I like my field because I can fix most of what I see in front of me. This virus has proved a very challenging foe, and I've come to really appreciate how much damage it can do to an individual's life, and that's not always, constrained to the people who end up in the hospital. That also affects patients who never have to get hospitalized, but who suffer from variations of long COVID. Really, the term we sort of use colloquially for people who get the infection and then, for whatever reason, even after the infection seems to have cleared from their body, suffer from long-term side effects of various kinds, and that can be very debilitating. I think it was amazingly revolutionary and probably underappreciated to see vaccines that are incredibly effective come out so quickly. I know that was a cause, the rapidity of their coming onto the scene was a cause of some concern and is a cause of some concerns to some folks. Having said that, having watched the vaccine development in pretty much real time, it's amazing to me how well things can be done in 2020, 2021 in terms of really speeding up clinical trials without compromising safety standards, and to watch two vaccines basically emerge onto the scene, both Pfizer's and Moderna's, the two mRNA vaccines we have, and really the gold standard for vaccines across the country right now. To have them come out so soon and prove to be, from everything we're seeing so far, so incredibly safe and durable and life-changing and holding up well to the many variants that have spun off from the original virus is really nothing short of a miracle. And I think a lot of people, in our country don't necessarily understand that we're, the envy of much of the globe in terms of having access to these vaccines easily, having them on hand, and really being able to bring people to safety through vaccination is, it's something that I feel incredibly strongly about because I spend a lot of my day dealing with people who have the infection. In fact, just this morning, just like most mornings, I was spending time in our COVID unit because, something people may not appreciate, but we continue to have active infection throughout the state. They're almost entirely in people who are unvaccinated now. And we continue to care for some desperately ill patients who are fighting for their lives. And these are, most of these guys were infected, 3, 4, 5 months after vaccines became available to them. And it kills me when I see these men and women, and in some cases youngsters, in whom we really could have prevented their infection by virtue of vaccination, and they're suffering mightily with a lot of damage to their family and their social circles as a result. It's quite a preventable tragedy. So, I think I understand that vaccination is a complex thing to wrap your head around for some people, and there's a natural hesitancy around vaccines that's pretty unique to vaccines. I always tell people, I don't see that same hesitancy in lots of other arenas. When I am treating a really nasty bacterial infection, someone with flesh-eating bacteria or something, and I offer a new antibiotic that looks incredibly promising, I never have someone say like, hey, wait a minute now, how about you give that to a few hundred other people and I'll, check back with me in like 3 or 4 months. Or if someone has a terrible cancer. And if someone has a terrible cancer and we have a new life-saving, cancer therapy for them and immunotherapy, you almost never hear someone go, oh, wait a second now, hold on now, that was developed too quickly, I don't trust it. It's like, please give it to me. And so there's just a unique hesitancy around vaccinations, and I sort of get it. But I also want people to understand that these are incredibly safe and effective vaccines, and we see the flip side, right? I see day to day what happens in folks who don't get vaccinated and become ill, and so it's something I obviously feel very strongly about helping people understand and speaking respectfully, and offering as much knowledge as I can, because there's preventable tragedies all around us now, in the form of folks who are declining or waiting on vaccinations, and I worry about that as a doc and as a human. So that's my quick, not so quick take on where we are now, Pam.
Well, thank you so much for sharing that, Tarquin, because none of us can really imagine what you've gone through and what you've seen, but I can imagine how frustrating it is to see people that you're desperately trying to save suffering so much with the knowledge you have, and knowing that that could have been prevented, that there is that there is hope and there is help, and we don't want to see people in that state. So now I'm going to invite Zamir to please share with us. We were kind of just launching on vaccinations and how rapidly they've been developed, and we've been deploying them. What is the current state of vaccinations in Hawaii? How do people on Maui continue to get vaccinated? And what is the importance of outreach to our community and helping people understand the need for these vaccinations?
Hi, yeah. Thanks for having me on. I would tell you that the state of vaccinations in Hawaii is actually doing decently well, actually really, really well. We're one of the top 5 states to have pushed vaccine out. As much vaccine as we've gotten, we've really, really pushed it out and gotten vaccine into arms, which is a tremendous accomplishment, right?
Yes.
We're a pretty isolated area, like an island in the middle of the ocean, and we've really come together as a society here and a culture out here to really embrace these vaccines as best as possible and try to get shots in as many arms as we can. And for those who have been willing to do it, they have come forth in droves to come get it, which is really a testament to how well they work with the medical community in order to get protected from this pretty terrible disease, as Dr. Collis really alluded to. I would say that one of the great things that has come about has been a really all of the medical groups and the medical companies working together for the sake of their communities in a bunch of different realms, whether that's at their own medical centers or through these large-scale mass vaccination sites, or now in this next phase of the project, which is us using these pretty extensive community-based vaccination pods, as we'll call them, to reach out to the communities who have been the hardest hit. And that's been really wonderful to watch, like being able to work with your compatriots on every island just to get to the most isolated and really, really secure places, and to be able to deliver a vaccine to them. It's been really important. It's important that we've shown the equity across all the systems, that we're willing to go to wherever patients are to give them vaccine in order to make sure that they're safe.
Absolutely.
And Tarquin alluded to this a lot in his talk just preceding this, but a lot of the people that we see are from these communities that don't have great access to medical care, and they live together with a lot of people, and they're not able to isolate as well as everybody else, nor do they have access to personal protective equipment, and that's how they're able to live and survive in Hawaii. And so when one of them gets sick, all of them get sick, and that can just lead to very, very terrible outcomes. So we've been working a lot with our communities now to really, really reach out, to go out and to find these people in their populations and find where they live, and really bring the vaccine to them, and hold events that may not be these huge, 1,800 to 2,000 people events per day, but they're more of the 150 to 300 people per day, where we're able to give them vaccine where they live. They just have to walk down the street to their local community center. I know Tarquin's participated in this, where we'll literally go into houses and do home visits and home checks just to deliver 1 or 2 vaccines, so we can help protect at least 1 or 2 more vulnerable people. And that's really the next stage of the game. The first, the people who are out there, it's really kind of divided into threes in my brain. The first third are the set of patients that really, really want the vaccine, and they'll do anything to get it. They will drive clear across every island in order to get their vaccine. They will go anywhere that they can. The second, the opposite end of the spectrum, the people that you're just never going to convince, no matter what we do. These are the super vaccine hesitant / they don't believe in it, and they're not going to get to it. But right now, we're firmly in that middle stage, right? We're in that middle stage of the people who they do kind of want to get the vaccine, but if there's anything that's causing them a reason not to get it, in other words, it's a 30-minute wait, it's during when my work hours are, it's not on the weekends, it's anything that causes just any little bit of grist in the wheel, they're just not going to reach out for it. So we have to remove a lot of those barriers for them, right? Showing up in their community centers, showing up in Safeway or Foodland or Times to give it to them. Working in coordination with the pharmacies as well as our community partners to bring it to them in their churches, in their schools. That's really the next step of the game.
I love to hear the tremendous outreach, and obviously you gentlemen have a great grasp on where we're at in the phases, and everything you're saying really tracks with what I'm hearing in this community. And so we really appreciate having you on today. For those who are just tuning in, I just want to let you know this is a special edition of Business Matters. We're talking about vaccines today, talking about, of course, COVID-19 vaccines, and helping those who maybe have an interest in it but have not yet gotten the vaccine, sharing some information and going through some questions with two esteemed doctors who are helping us get some additional information so that for those who are not vaccinated, we can get vaccinated and continue to work toward that herd immunity. I really appreciate both of you giving us such a great overview. Thank you so much, Zamir. I'd like to talk a little bit now about vaccinations in teens and adolescents. I know we're moving down the age group now, and so what we'd like to do is understand a little bit more about the new group that can be vaccinated, teens and adolescents, and if you could go over some of the common questions or things that you hear, Zamir.
Yeah, so right now we just started with the 12 to 17-year-olds. Well, really it's the 12 to 15-year-olds. The 16 and above, we were able to get to a good chunk of them with the Pfizer vaccine. Pfizer as a company added on to their EUA to encompass now the 12 and above. And this actually age group has been a welcome boon, actually. As we've seen with a lot of our vaccination sites across Hawaii, they were having to have less people were actually signing up for appointments. And then once we've hit this 12 to 15-year-old range, all of a sudden all the appointments have been rapidly taken up, and people are really, really flocking to it. I think there's a number of reasons for that. The first being that there have been a number of people in the older age groups from 16 and above who have gotten the vaccine and who have not had, one of the purported, mythical events that happen when you try vaccines. And so since their loved ones and their parents have done so well with it, and it's allowed them to reach some level of comfort about being with their elderly grandparents, great grandparents, and their at-risk loved ones who may be immunocompromised, et cetera. I think it's helped with this boon between the 12 to 15-year-olds, which is protecting our youth, and allowing them to get back to the things that are really important to them: congregated activities, youth sports, being in school, all those things is to be the kind of the foundational support to getting them back to how we used to be just a year and a half ago.
And everybody is so eager to get back to how we used to be. We all long for that desperately. Yet I do well understand questions linger. So maybe we could, between the two of you, we could talk about some of the three most common questions for teens and adolescents that we've heard. Let me share the first one. Why do I need to get vaccinated for COVID-19 if young people don't get sick anyways?
Yeah, I'll be happy to jump on that one. This is Tarquin. I think that so there's a couple parts of that question really, and a couple different kinds of answers depending on how you think about it. I think one thing that's important to understand is that young people do get sick with COVID. certainly if you look at death rates, this is not a virus that kills very many children, but it certainly kills some. We've had over 300 deaths that are confirmed from COVID over the year in the United States, and if you look at other measures where it's less confirmed and more probable, it's probably north of 500, frankly, and each one of those is a terrible tragedy. What's not captured in that number, however, is the number of people who are children who've become sick and have suffered mightily, and not died. And we've taken care of a bunch of these kids over time, and it can be quite humbling to see how rough this virus can be to even those kids who are young and healthy and have intact immune systems. So I think it's worth understanding that this is a virus that I have a lot of respect for. There's also a growing sense within the infectious disease community that the variants that are arising are rougher on younger folks than the original virus that first emerged and was primarily preying mostly on the elderly. It's important to understand that this virus, although there's interesting ongoing debate about exactly how it came onto the scene in China, very clearly coronaviruses are animal-adapted viruses primarily. This is probably a disease in bats, whether it escaped from a lab in China, whether it came directly into a farmer, we're still trying to sort out. But there's no question that its virus really, its origins as a virus came from the animal kingdom, and it's been no surprise to me to watch it adapt over time to a new host, which is humans. And as it does that, it can learn to spread more easily, which is what we're seeing with lots of the variants. And in some cases, that brings with it a little more deadliness to different age groups. And we haven't firmed it up yet, but there definitely is a sense from data out of India and other places that the current variants that are circulating can be more dangerous to children than the original virus. I think other sort of subtle ways that I think are worth thinking about this is that, as I mentioned, there are children who get quite ill and don't end up in the hospital and suffer from long COVID, which again is just kind of a colloquial term for folks who have long-term symptoms. And if you think about dealing with someone with mononucleosis, for example, which is, I think, a disease a lot of us have become familiar with just growing up, which is caused by a different virus, there are folks who suffer with variations on that and feel, despite being very young, quite unable to function for long spans of time, affecting school, affecting sports, affecting their family life, and they don't show up on the radar as as casualties in terms of mortality, but are profoundly affected, sometimes for many months. And that's a preventable difficulty/tragedy depending on the life that you're dealing with. And then the last thing I would say is children sometimes who don't get infected can spread it unwittingly as an infection to people they love, even if those folks are vaccinated on occasion. So we certainly do see situations in which children get infected, feel fine, but in that context, a grandparent becomes infected, sometimes because children don't show you that they're infected at all. They handle the infection relatively well, they're unaware of it, and yet they spread it to someone for whom that's a deadly infection, and you never want to have that on your conscience as a parent or a child, that you caused real illness or even death in someone you care about. And so this brings up the concept of sort of herd immunity, which is a complicated issue, but the simplest version is that, for those who can be vaccinated, you're protecting people other than yourselves. And I think it's important that we do think about these things as a community as well as individuals.
I completely agree, and we talk here in Hawaii about it's our kuleana, right? This is a gift that we protect ourselves, but we also protect others. And as a kid, I grew up as an asthmatic. I seem to outgrow a lot of that as an adult, but I can't imagine being an asthmatic and coming down with COVID. And, just when you're already struggling to breathe, and then to have something like this. So it's very frightening to me personally. Another question that comes up is people are worried about, is the COVID-19 vaccine dangerous for teens and adolescents who are still growing?
Yeah, hi, this is I would say that if you look at the basis of the build of the vaccine, it being an mRNA vaccine, you'll note that it actually is a very, very safe vaccine. It is a vaccine that, to dispel some of the myths that sit around it, It's a vaccine that it gives a blueprint to your immune system of how to fight off an infection should it be presented with it in the near future. That it does so by, coming in, the mRNA delivers itself into the cytoplasm of your cell, which it then, after an hour or two, it actually is gone after it's delivered the blueprint. It does not go and mess with your DNA like some other vaccines do. It doesn't have any of those long-term effects that we know of just yet that can be associated with other things. And so as a vaccine in and of itself, it's been proven to be very safe. And we know that because it's actually been delivered to literally hundreds of millions of people over time, and the effects of which have been very well documented. Now, there are certainly some things that we're finding out now that have come up recently that we're investigating, but I would argue that that's actually the point of all these systems. All these are emergent or safety systems, where we go and find if there are any worrisome or difficult parts to this vaccine that we didn't identify during its testing. And I'm referring to like some of the spot cases of myocarditis that they've recently been talking about. In general, upwards of 5 million kids from 12 to 17 have been given this vaccine across the United States. And while we do have a handful of reports of some things happening, in general, it's very, very safe. And speaking to what Tarquin just spoke to before, like us getting back to the point where we can hang around our elderly loved ones and hang around our classmates who may or may not be immunocompromised and stuff like that. To do so safely in a community, we're going to need to take some of these steps to not only protect ourselves, but to protect those around us.
Absolutely.
Hey, Pam.
Yes.
I have just one or two thoughts to add on there.
Yes, Tarquin. Yeah.
Which was so right on. There's a guy named Maurice Hilleman who was a doc who was one of the fathers of vaccinology, and he developed, most of the time while he was working for Merck, developed 8 of the 14 vaccines that we use routinely in clinical practice. And his rule of thumb, and he was a pretty remarkable guy. By the way, he had the chance to name any number of vaccines after himself, but was a very modest guy and never chose to. His rule of thumb was you start to breathe a sigh of relief, and you breathe a real sigh of relief once a vaccine has been given to about 3 million people, okay? Because that's the point at which you really know what you're dealing with in terms of efficacy and safety.
Right.
Once you hit the 3 million mark, you know basically what you've got as a vaccine developer. And, as I mentioned, there's been 200 million plus doses of the mRNA vaccines given out. Like, we know very well what these vaccines are about at this point in terms of safety, and it's a pretty miraculous track record. These have been the most scrutinized vaccines in human history in terms of not only their development, but their post-marketing surveillance. And, it's quite remarkable. I think the other thing I would throw out there is that I think humans, we're great at a lot of things. We're pretty terrible at understanding risk. Risk as a concept is numerically understanding risk is just something as a species we're fairly terrible at. I think that's part of what drives Las Vegas' success, right?
Yes, absolutely.
We don't really understand the risk of winning versus losing. I think that I always tell people who are hesitant about the vaccines that we have now, one, we know an incredible amount about their safety, and it's unbelievably reassuring. And we know an immense amount about this virus and what it can do to you. And if you live in the world of statistics and vaccinology and epidemiology, what little we don't know about these vaccines in terms of safety, even long-term safety, is so minuscule as a risk compared to what we do know about catching this infection and what it can do to you. Like, it's not even close. If you have a 1 in several million chance of having an adverse event from any vaccine, but a 1 or 2% chance of dying from the infection it prevents, it's not much of a horse race, if you really understand the numbers. And I just want to reassure people that the vaccines are, 1, well known and understood, and 2, this is a disease that is unbelievably bad in some folks and really worth avoiding.
I really appreciate those points. Thank you. Thank you, Tarquin, and thank you, Zumair. Zumair also goes by Zai, so if you hear that, same doctor, Zumair or Zai. So, on that note, Zumair, would you share with us a little bit about, people are asking another question for adolescents in particular, is if I still have to wear a mask indoors, even if I get vaccinated, what's the point?
Yeah, it kind of goes back to what we were just saying. There are still those out there amongst us that are not going to get the vaccine or not willing to get the vaccine or may have very real reasons to not be able to get the vaccine. And those people are at particular risk. What's poorly understood at the moment is, and we're still gaining a lot of knowledge around this, is the ability to continue to transmit the infection despite the fact that you've had the vaccine, and the ability to have other people be at risk when they are unvaccinated compared to vaccinated people around them. And so as we're learning the dynamics of people who are vaccinated in an unvaccinated realm, it's important that we still take the same preventative measures that we have been beforehand. There are people amongst us who, like I said, they're just not going to agree to get the vaccine, and some of them are actually the ones who are literally at the most risk for having the worst effects of this pretty terrible virus. And so we're going to need to do that until we get to a point where the vast majority of us are vaccinated and the risk is very, very small for them. We're going to be stuck in that for a little bit as we learn more.
I appreciate you sharing that. It really is, and I think, as you two point out, we can't underestimate this transferability. And so, we keep thinking, and the good news is we're moving. We're getting into a more positive state. And, of course, the more of us are vaccinated, the less we have to worry about that transferability because we've put those protections in place. So it is so important that we get to this herd immunity and really each take on this responsibility, do our part. Okay, now we're into the Q&A round. So I'm going to start with some lightning questions and have you two gentlemen, we've got Drs. Collis and Dr. Moen fielding these questions for us from Kaiser Permanente. We're talking today about vaccines and COVID-19. So let's start with the first question. We're out of questions for the youth and adolescents now, but want to talk about just general questions that people wrote in on. Do you have any suggestions on how people can best prepare to get the vaccine? We've heard drinking a lot of water is really helpful. Is that a myth? Is that true? What can people do to prepare for the vaccine that might help them lessen their reaction?
Yeah. This is I would say the easiest thing is to put yourself in the right frame of mind when you get there. The truth is, there is, especially in this 12 to 17-year-old, I know we're talking about vaccines in general, but for these 12 to 17-year-olds, there's a lot of anxiety when they walk in. And it's really, a lot of it's around the needle phobia, they hate needles. But more importantly, so many people have been talking and scrutinizing this vaccine that it's made up to be something way more eventful than it actually really is. It's literally a pretty small needle, like a 24 gauge needle, which is a very, very tiny needle into your shoulder. It lasts, I don't know, maybe less than a second. And most people will say, like, wait, did you even put it in yet? I didn't even know that it.
That would be me.
Yeah. And so, really, a lot of their, this anxiety coming in is this what we've kind of put upon ourselves. Like we've built this thing up into being something a little bit more than what it really is at its base, which is a pretty great life-saving measure for a lot of people that come along as a moonshot, a really miraculous moonshot to put an end to this pretty devastating pandemic overall. So the things we usually tell people are try to get as much rest as you can. Hydrate as best as possible. Do not pre-medicate. We strongly recommend not pre-medicating unless you've been directed so by a physician. We ask that you don't take anything like Tylenol or Advil or Motrin beforehand, and to really, really watch the symptomatology afterwards, right? Most people will develop, if they're going to develop symptoms, They'll usually develop it about 12 hours after they get the shot, and it usually lasts no longer than 24, 48 hours. The most common side effect that people have is usually muscle pain or pain at the injection site. Some people have fatigue, headaches, fevers, chills, almost like a mild or moderate flu. And if you ever have those symptoms and just can't take it anymore, we strongly recommend Tylenol to help with some of that symptomatology. Otherwise, a lot of this is, like I said, is kind of managing your expectations as you walk in.
Well, great to know. Tarquin, I'll ask this question of you. Is it true that moving my arm a lot will reduce the amount of arm soreness after getting the vaccine?
I'm like pretty agnostic on that. I've watched enough people get it now and talked to them afterwards, and there are those that prefer to get it on their dominant arm. Let's say they're right-handed, they want it on the right side so that they're moving their arm around. And there are others who are like, forget that. If I'm going to have a sore arm, I want it on my, my weaker side. We haven't found that moving your arm around particularly more or less really makes any difference at all. And I would echo Zai's basic sentiment is, if you're going to do the vaccination, and we certainly hope that folks do, understand that it's a really boring event for a lot of people. Like they have this whole build-up thing, and then all they have like the next day is maybe a sore arm. For those that are getting one of the mRNA vaccines, the Pfizer or the Moderna, which is most of what's out there, it's the second shot that some people gives them pause, and they have maybe, as I mentioned, a day or two of feeling kind of lousy, and it doesn't matter which side you get it on in that sense. But again, I always tell people, hey, that's the feeling of your immune system ramping up. Okay, when you feel a little junky after a vaccine, and it's not unique to these vaccines, by the way, that's actually the symptoms that are brought on by interferon and a bunch of other chemicals that your body sort of increases its production of when you are stimulated by a vaccine or a true infection. And that's just what to expect. It won't last long. It's perfectly safe. For the vast majority of folks, they feel fine after a day or two. And again, that only affects maybe 40 or 50% of people. There's a good solid chunk of people who sort of keep waiting for the other boot to drop, and it never happens. And that doesn't mean the vaccine's not working, by the way. The vaccine's working fine, whether you feel a little lousy or a little or not. But yes, in terms of moving your arm around, don't feel compelled to, and don't feel that you shouldn't. It's really just, I tell people, just play it by ear. See what works for you. If it feels better to move around, awesome. If you'd rather, put your arm in a sling and and get some sympathy
and baby it.
and go to, that's cool too. Don't feel like you've got to do one thing or the other. It's kind of whatever works. Very individual.
Well, that's very nice. Good to know. Thank you, Tarquin. Zamir, why do some people have side effects and others do not?
The vaccine itself is pretty high on the reactogenicity scale. Like actually, all of them are all the ones that are geared towards COVID vaccine. It's really like Tarquin said, it's an expression of your immune system. Like we're trying to spur your immune system to recognize any foreign invaders, specifically the COVID infection, and fight it off. And in doing so, your immune system really expresses itself in a bunch of different ways. I mean, we've had a ton of symptomatology that happens like just after the vaccine's delivered to about 20 minutes later to about 4 hours later. And all of them are just like an expression of your immune system to say like, hello, I'm here, and this is how I'm going to deal with it. It's not anything, we've learned a lot. Like I've personally watched a lot of the reactions afterwards, and almost all of them, whether that this funny taste, metallic taste in your mouth, or this feeling of feeling decently flushed after the initial shot, almost all of it goes away in the 15 to 30 minute period that we're watching you, and that's about it. And most people feel much better after it happens. It's kind of like all their anxiety kind of melts away if they realize that that's all that they've had. In a weird, I will say this in a weird kind of way, I'm one of those who did not have a terrible reaction or a bad reaction at all. And I was weirdly jealous of all the people that did. Like,
you didn't get the days off.
Whether or not I had an immune system. And you kind of want that assurance that, hey, it's there, it's recognizing something, it's going to work. Whenever you're faced with COVID, if it's on your doorstep. And so I got weirdly jealous of those around me that actually had a bad reaction to it.
Well, that's an interesting perspective, Zamir.
Just jump in and assuage your guilt as someone who felt pretty junky afterwards. So, but Zai does bring up an important point, and it's something I alluded to. Understand that, again, depending on your age, and by the way, you're less likely to have significant side effects from any of these vaccines the older you are, and you're a little more likely if you're young, and you're actually slightly statistically more likely to have a little more in the way of side effects if you're a woman than a man. Women have much more robust immune systems actually at the cellular level than men do. One of many reasons why women are meant to outlive men. And that translates to feeling sometimes a little sicker after vaccination. If you look at large population statistics. But if you are in that group, as my parents were, who felt nothing at all, and Zai as well, don't feel like, hey, wait a second, one, is it working, or two, did I get placebo or some crazy thing by mistake? We know that maybe 30 or 40% of people will have a significant side effect from these vaccines, but the population, protection is upwards of, 94, 95%. So there's just a huge number of people who feel absolutely nothing and are getting immense benefit. So don't feel like in some way you're broken. Zai's broken in other ways. So
I was going to say, well, now we learned actually that you're not broken. You have well, I mean, it's nice to know if you did have a reaction. I guess that you have a really strong immune system, and that's great. It's doing what it's supposed to do. So that's pretty awesome. I thought he was looking for a few extra days off, but I'm also, and of course it wasn't that because you guys are on the front lines. You don't get to take days off. I know. But it was also interesting to hear, and I'm going to go home and say that at my house that there was a reason I got a stronger reaction, and it's because I've got a stronger immune system. So nice to know that answer. Ladies, use that.
By the way, it's off subject, but a lot of the genes for immune strength are carried on the X chromosome, and you have two of those, and means I have one apiece, and that's actually part of the deal. It's also why diseases like lupus, which are autoimmune disease where your body sort of turns on itself, are more common in women than men because their immune system is so hyped up that sometimes it goes a little haywire and can make them ill as well. So it's the only downside to that. But it's an interesting area of research.
Yeah, really, really fascinating to know. And of course, we've got you two experts. So for those, if you're just tuning in, you are listening to Business Matters, and we have Dr. Tarquin Dr. Tarquin Collis here with us from Kaiser Permanente, along with, we have Dr. Zamir, who is also with us, Moen, and both of the gentlemen are talking to us about everything that we possibly want to know on vaccines that we can get in an hour, actually, because I'm sure we could spend days doing this. I'm absolutely fascinated by what I'm learning. So, Tarquin, for you, is any vaccine better than the others? Which one would you take if you had to choose?
Sure, yeah, that's a complicated question in its own way. So there's really two classes of vaccines available in the United States right now. The mRNA vaccines, which are Pfizer and Moderna, these are the first two that came out, and then the Johnson & Johnson vaccine, which is a single-shot vaccine. Both of the mRNA vaccines are two shots separated by 3 or 4 weeks. I tell people, first of all, the Pfizer and Moderna vaccines, the mRNA vaccines, were the first out of the gate. And as I watched them being developed and I saw their early clinical trial results, I told my own medical group here at Kaiser, it's my gut that these will be not just the first, but probably the best of this first generation of vaccines that come out. And that has proved to be true in many respects. They're the ones that we know best. They're the ones that seem to offer the broadest protection against the different variants that have arisen. They're the ones that seem to last the longest in terms of their immunity. We have more data on their long-term protection than we do the Johnson & Johnson vaccine. The Johnson & Johnson vaccine, though, is not to be sneezed at. It's a single-shot vaccine right now. There may come a time at which actually we recommend the booster for all of these vaccines, including Johnson & Johnson. I think that's going to come down the pike. But for now, it's a one-shot and you're done vaccine. If you look at the numbers across the board, I always tell people you get a little bit what you pay for, and I don't mean that in terms of the vaccines having to cost anything because they're free if you get them. But the efficacy of a two-shot vaccine in this case is a little higher in terms of preventing you from catching the infection at all. Okay, it's about probably 95% protection for either the Pfizer or the Moderna vaccine, and 15 or 20% lower than that depending on the age group you're in if you take the Johnson & Johnson. So the easier vaccine is a little less effective in terms of preventing infection. If you take a larger view of how well does either vaccine prevent you from getting seriously ill, ending up in the hospital, dying, etc., which is, of course, what we really care about immensely. We care about preventing infection in general, but we certainly care terribly about people ending up in the hospital. Both vaccines, both mRNA vaccines and the Johnson & Johnson, are excellent at that. So, important to understand that. I think, some people ask, should I get Pfizer or Moderna? Is there a difference between the two mRNA vaccines? And I really don't see that at all. Coming out in the data, these are nearly identical vaccines at the molecular level. They have slightly different lipid membranes, but I tell people, they're like M&Ms of different colors. They're basically the same chocolate inside. They have a slightly different wrapping that's just subtly different, but that's really it. I wouldn't hold out for one versus the other. I think really the big question is, does the extra protection against becoming ill and probably against variants matter enough to you to do a two-shot vaccine, and the sort of bother that entails is coming back for a second shot. I would strongly prefer that, for my own patients and my own family. I think that it's worth coming back and getting a second shot of a better vaccine in terms of overall protection. Mm-hmm. But what really matters, I think, is getting vaccinated at all, and whatever vaccine you have available to you and whatever works for you in your lifestyle, I think is really important to take advantage of. There is one small subtlety that I think it's important to point out. There is a very rare complication of the Johnson & Johnson vaccine, which has to do with blood clots, which simply does not exist in the mRNA vaccine class as best we see, and that's particularly present in young women. So if a young woman comes to me, someone less than 50, and asks which vaccine they should get, I strongly advise that if they can, they should get the mRNA vaccine, even though the risk of a blood clot from the Johnson & Johnson is quite low. It's non-zero, and it basically is zero if you choose an mRNA vaccine. So that particular group, I do try and really make sure that they understand that mRNA vaccines do have some advantages that are specific to them in that age group, and they should really think about it. But but of course, if they want to proceed with Johnson & Johnson, it's been proven to be an excellent vaccine overall, and I'd rather they get good protection than none at all.
I really appreciate you covering that thoroughly, because that is the big question on everybody's mind. And I know there were many people who are waiting, and what you shared is very consistent with our Lieutenant Governor here in Hawaii saying, the thing is, get vaccinated. The important thing is get vaccinated. The vaccines exist. Understand what you might want, pick and choose, ask your doctor, but get vaccinated because it is so important given how terrible this disease attacks our bodies. Thank you so much for that, Tarkman. Zamir, I'm going to ask you the next question. When will the vaccines be available to even younger children?
Ooh, that's a good question. Right now, the vaccine testing for the younger children from age 2 and up are ongoing. We have some early signals that it may be as early as September. That you'll have the next age group, which would be 2 and above, be ready for vaccines. What I would tell you is it's a little bit different at this stage, right? At this stage, you then, while all the other ones for 12 and above was about using the same dosing that you would for consistently throughout the ages. It changes now when you have people who are under a certain weight, who have differing immune systems, et cetera. And so now they're going to start to play a little bit with, how much do you need to stim the immune system to get the same response, especially with people who are smaller in size. And so that's what they're figuring out right now with this younger age group. And that will take a little bit of time over the spring and summer, and we're hoping to have some data back by the end of summer to be able to put forth a plan, hopefully by the beginning of the next school year, so September, October area, where we're thinking they'll come out with the next age group.
Okay, thank you. We've got a few more minutes, so I'm getting the 5-minute mark down. So we're gonna go through a couple as quick as we can. We were also going to have Garrett Marrero of my brewing company on, but I did know that he was at the airport and he was gonna do a yeoman's job of trying to call in and participate with us today, but we haven't heard him on yet. So we'll continue on with our questions. So, Tarquin, should we be worried about the COVID-19 variants in other countries?
Yeah, it's such an interesting pandemic to watch unfold in real time. And as I mentioned before, this is an animal virus that's adapting to humans over time, and it's a virus that, like any virus, takes advantage of opportunities of infecting many people to become more proficient at what it does, which is to spread. And any virus, all they really want, they don't particularly want to make you ill. Their main goal in life is just to make more viruses. And the more people that are susceptible to them, the more that they can replicate and find advantages and chinks in our armor. And so I do think that watching variants emerge, we hear about the UK variant, we hear about the Indian variant now, the California, New York variants, Brazil variants, all of these individual variants arose during times of unchecked replication, and viruses always take advantage of that. And yes, I think the best protection, for all of us is for the world to be effectively vaccinated. I think, if you just take a 100-foot view of the pandemic so far, do we need another lesson that what happens in some faraway, wet market can come, in China, in an industrial city, can actually arrive at our doorstep and turn our lives upside down? This isn't the first infectious disease to show us that. A lot of viruses have emerged out of the jungle. HIV, Ebola, Zika, I could go on and on, chikungunya. These are all animal viruses that have adapted to humans over time. And what matters outside of our borders, we're ignorant to think that can't come out and bite us. And so I think that as much as we focus on our own country, I applaud the Biden administration and the WHO for their efforts to really increase vaccination across the world, because whether you view that from a purely American nationalistic sense of what's best for us, or whether you view that from a humanistic sense of actually it matters what's happening in humanity outside of our borders, even though they're not, from the same nationality as us. It doesn't matter which of those lenses you look at. It's the right thing to get the world protected, because inevitably, if a strange variant emerges in somewhere with unchecked immunity that we could have prevented by vaccinating, Brazil, Argentina, Uruguay, name the country that's suffering right now, that will come back to haunt us. I guarantee you.
Yeah.
I guarantee you it will. So it's definitely to our benefit to try to keep variants from emerging in other parts of the country, both from a humanitarian standpoint and purely from the functioning of our own country and society.
Thank you. Well, gentlemen, the hour has gone by so quick, and I just really want to thank Dr. Tarquin Collis and Dr. Zamir Moen, both doctors with Kaiser Permanente on the front lines and helping to educate us about vaccines and our responsibility. It's our kuleana to help others. We want to protect our community. I'm Pamela Timpop, wishing you a great Maui day, and thank you for tuning in to Business Matters. Aloha and a hui ho.